Every great story has a beginning. And every empire, well, every empire is born from a rebellion. The story of Hollywood, our global dream factory, doesn't start with red carpets and glamour. No, it starts with an escape. It's a tale of light and shadow, of freedom versus control, all played out over a century. So let's dive into how it all began.
It all started right here, with this simple, almost magical moment. A new kind of magic flickered into existence, first in places like Paris and New York. At first, it was just a novelty, an interesting invention, a curiosity.
Because almost as soon as this new art form was born, a battle for it began. And this wasn't just a fight over patents or profits, no. This was a fight for who would get to control the stories, the stars, and the very light itself.
Our story really kicks off on the East Coast, in a world that was completely controlled by one very famous and very powerful man. This place wasn't a kingdom of dreams yet, it was an empire of patents.
Yep, that Thomas Edison. History remembers him as one of the great inventors, right? But in the origin story of Hollywood, he plays a totally different part. He's the first great movie villain. He saw the incredible business potential in motion pictures, and he was absolutely determined to own every last piece of it. So, how did he plan to control the entire industry? He formed this coalition called the Motion Picture Patents Company, but everyone just called it the Edison Trust. And the idea behind it was simple and brutal. If you own the patents to the cameras and the film stock, you basically hold the whole industry hostage.
And oh, the rules were enforced with an iron fist. You want to make a movie? You gotta pay Edison. You want to show a movie in your theater? You pay Edison. And actors? The trust thought that giving them credit on screen would make them too famous, too powerful. And if you broke any of these rules, Edison's hired muscle, and I mean literal private detectives, would raid your set, smash your cameras, and shut you down for good.
Facing this kind of oppression, a small group of independent filmmakers decided they weren't going to fight the empire head-on. They were going to run from it. This wasn't some strategic business expansion. It was a desperate cross-country bid for survival. So they fled west, as far away as they could get from the industrial gray of the East Coast. And they landed in this dusty agricultural town in Southern California. It was a land of orange groves and, more importantly, two things they desperately needed: constant, brilliant sunshine, which was perfect for filming, and thousands of miles of distance from Edison's lawyers and his goons.
Let's be crystal clear about this. All the sources make it plain. Yeah, the weather was great, but the #1 reason these filmmakers founded Hollywood was to escape the monopoly. So you see, Hollywood wasn't built on a dream of glamour. It was founded on a rebellion against control.
But this wasn't just a retreat. This was the start of a revolution. Out there in the California sun, a group of defiant upstarts began to build a brand new kingdom, all their own.
And every rebellion needs a leader, right? The man who became Edison's public enemy #1 was a German immigrant named Karl Lemmel. He flat out refused to pay the trust, started his own independent film company, and basically dared Edison to come and get him.
And oh, did Edison come after him. Just to give you an idea of how big this fight was, think about this number: 289. That's how many lawsuits Edison filed against Lemmel alone. Edison's strategy was ruthless. Just bury the rebels in so many legal fees they'd go bankrupt. But Lemmel was smart. He fought back with some seriously ingenious tactics. He created the very first movie stars, putting their names on screen to draw in bigger crowds. He would keep multiple cameras on set, so if Edison's detectives stormed in, he'd just quickly swap in a legal one. But most importantly, he got all the other rebels to band together, pooling their money to fight the lawsuits as a team. He basically dragged Edison into a legal swamp that he just couldn't win. So while Lemmel was fighting the business war, another rebel, D.W. Griffith, was busy fighting an artistic one. Before Griffith, movies were pretty simple, just static shots. It was like watching a play from the back of the theater. But with his 1915 epic, The Birth of a Nation, he showed the world what film could really do. He used close-ups to show what an actor was feeling. He used clever editing to build suspense. He basically invented the language of cinematic storytelling. Now, we absolutely have to acknowledge that this landmark film is also deeply controversial for its racist propaganda. Griffith was a technical genius who gave film its artistic voice, but that voice, in this case, was tragically marred by the awful prejudices of his time.
So, with Edison's business model being torn apart and the art form itself completely revolutionized, the rebels were finally on the verge of victory.
The old world was about to crumble, and a new one was ready to rise from the dust.
And when the end came, it came fast. First, in 1915, in this moment of just supreme irony, Carl Laemmle opened the gates to Universal City, and guess who his guest of honor was at the ribbon cutting? Thomas Edison. Then, that same year, the courts delivered the final knockout punch, declaring the Edison Trust an illegal monopoly. By 1917, the war was over. The rebels had won. Hollywood was officially the new center of the film universe. They had done it. They had escaped a tyrant and built their own kingdom of light, a system founded on independence and creative freedom. But, as we're going to see in part 2, in a town built on ambition and power, the heroes of... Welcome to Reingold's talk on artificial intelligence and film. To really understand where filmmaking is headed, we kind of have to look back at where it's been. So today, let's pull back that velvet curtain on Hollywood's so-called golden age. You know the one. An era of just breathtaking glamour, of gods and goddesses projected 20 feet tall on the silver screen. But behind that dazzling facade was a system of absolute control, a world of dark secrets, and a fight for artistic freedom that really defined the movies we still love today. And it all kicked off with this one line, the first synchronized dialogue in a feature film. When Al Jolson said this, he didn't just break the silence of the silent era. Oh no. He kicked off a massive technological and cultural revolution. This wasn't just the start of the talkies, it was the birth announcement of Hollywood as an industrial empire. So, here's our journey for today. First, we'll see how this incredible dream factory was built on the magic of sound and color. Then, we're going to explore the beautiful but confining gilded cage that held it all together, the rigid rules of the censor, and the ironclad contracts of the studios. And finally, we'll meet the rebels, the stars who dared to rattle the bars of that cage. Okay, so picture this. It's the late 1920s and into the 30s. While the world outside was really grappling with the Great Depression, Hollywood was busy engineering this spectacular escape for everyone. And it was all built on two groundbreaking leaps in technology. First up, 1927. Sound arrives and just changes everything. Suddenly you could have this sharp, witty dialogue, grand musicals. The possibilities weren't endless. Then in the mid-30s, you get 3-strip Technicolor, which for the very first time allowed for a full, vibrant, jaw-dropping spectrum of color on screen. I mean, the speed of this change was stunning. Silent films were basically extinct within just a few years of The Jazz Singer, and by 1939, films like The Wizard of Oz had made color the new standard for spectacle. And that's exactly what it was, a factory. Studios like MGM, Warner Brothers, and Paramount totally perfected this production line model, just churning out hundreds of films every single year. They created this polished, perfect world that offered a weekly escape for a global audience that was just starving for a little glamour and adventure. But, every dream has its rules. And in Golden Age Hollywood, those rules were brutally enforced by the first bar of our gilded cage, the ever-present threat of censorship. So the studios were terrified of government regulation, and they were also feeling pressure from some powerful religious groups. So what did they do? They created their own monster. The Motion Picture Production Code, better known as the Hays Code, was strictly enforced from 1934 on. And this wasn't some friendly suggestion. It was a hardcore rulebook that dictated the moral universe of every single film. And the rules were, well, they were frankly absurd. A 3-second limit on kisses? Can you imagine Casablanca with a stopwatch? It's nuts. Married couples on screen? They had to sleep in separate twin beds, creating this weird, sterile reality. And any real-world complexity, like criminals getting away with it or, heaven forbid, interracial relationships, was just completely erased from the screen. This nickname for Joseph Breen, the guy who enforced the code, really says it all. The code didn't just trim the edges of stories, it basically cut the heart out of any movie that tried to reflect the complexities of real life, leaving this sanitized, overly simplified version of the world. Okay, so if the Hays Code was controlling everything that happened on screen, the studio system controlled every single aspect of what happened off it. This was the second force of control, and believe me, it was absolute. And what does this number mean? 8? Well, that's the big 8. The studios that ran the entire town. We're talking about a vertical monopoly. They owned the production studios, the distribution networks, and even the movie theaters themselves. There was literally no escape. Now, at the very heart of all this control was the infamous 7-year contract. People often called them slave contracts, and for good reason. The studio dictated your roles, your salary, your public appearances. They even picked your name and told you who you were allowed to date. It was total ownership of a person.
And this wasn't just business, it was deeply, profoundly personal. This quote from Bette Davis, one of the biggest stars of the era, just reveals the incredible sense of imprisonment that so many actors felt. They were the most famous people on the planet, yet they were treated like property. And just when you think it couldn't get any crazier, there was another, much more sinister player in the game. The Chicago outfit actually took control of the main film technicians union. They used threats of massive strikes to extort millions in protection money from the studios. It was this dark, corrupt underbelly that was weirdly mirroring the gangster films they were making right on the studio lots. But here's the thing. Even in the most tightly controlled system, the human spirit is going to fight back. This era isn't just defined by its constraints, but by the brilliant artists who found ways to sing, even when they were inside the cage.
Bette Davis wasn't just a victim of the system, she was one of its fiercest opponents. She got so tired of being forced into these mediocre roles that in 1937, she actually took Warner Brothers to court to try and break her contract. Now, she lost the case, but she won a huge moral victory. She exposed how oppressive these contracts were and paved the way for others like Olivia de Havilland, who would later win a landmark case that finally started to weaken the studio's grip.
Humphrey Bogart, on the other hand, fought his battles right there on the screen. He had to work within the confines of the Hays Code, which, remember, demanded that all crime be punished. So what did he do? He created a totally new kind of hero. His characters in films like The Maltese Falcon were cynical, they were morally ambiguous, they used this tough exterior to shield a noble core. And that was a kind of complexity the censors just couldn't easily police. It's a brilliant example of how artists could subvert the system from within.
Which really brings us to the central paradox of the Golden Age. I mean, think about it. With all these restrictions, with the censors' scissors and the studio tyrants, how on earth did they manage to create some of the greatest films of all time?
The answer is so simple, and yet it's profound. The genius of this era was a rebellion against the factory. If a director was unable to show a crime, he'd focus on a shadow creeping along a wall. If a writer was unable to state passion, she'd craft dialogue that just crackled with innuendo. The constraints, ironically, forced a brand new, much more subtle kind of creativity. And maybe no one captured this bittersweet truth of Hollywood's golden age better than Bob Hope. It was a time of immense pressure and so much personal sacrifice, all in service of creating a flawless, perfect dream for the rest of the world.
That golden age officially ended with a 1948 Supreme Court ruling that broke up the studio monopolies. But its legacy, well, it's complicated. It gave us timeless art built on a foundation of control, a dream factory built inside a gilded cage. And it really makes you wonder, what parts of this system, the creative battles, the monopoly power, the tension between art and commerce, still echo in the Hollywood of today? A question to ponder. For now, enter...
You know, in every great story, even the story of Hollywood, there comes a moment when the empire starts to crumble. All that glamour, all that power, that whole system that seemed like it would last forever, well, it turns out it was built on ground that was about to shake.
And oh boy, did it ever happen. You'd think after the war things would calm down in the movie business, right? Nope. Instead, Hollywood got a revolution. And this one wasn't fought with guns. It was fought in courtrooms, with blacklists, and most importantly, with cameras.
So where did the first domino fall? You might think it was some big creative fight or a massive flop at the box office, but it wasn't. The first crack in that fortress was actually a legal earthquake, a court decision that was about to shake the entire industry right down to its foundations. Okay, so you gotta understand, for decades, the big studios weren't just making movies, they were absolute empires. Think about it, they owned the stars, they owned the equipment, and this is the really important part, they owned the movie theaters where you actually went to see the films. It's this thing called vertical integration, and it basically meant they had a total stranglehold on everything. Well, this Paramount decree, it just blew that whole model to smithereens. The Supreme Court basically walked in and said, hey, you kings of Hollywood, you can't own the whole kingdom anymore.
And wow, did the power shift. It was dramatic. I mean, look at the old system. The studios had this iron grip, locking actors into these 7-year contracts. You were basically their property. But then, boom, the new reality hits, and it's a world of, yeah, chaos, but also incredible opportunity. All that talent was suddenly set free. Actors, writers, directors, they were all free agents now. The whole game had just been turned on its head.
But as one form of control started to crumble, another one, something way more sinister, started to creep in. The fight for Hollywood's soul wasn't just about money anymore. It became about politics, about ideology. A really dark shadow of paranoia was starting to fall over sunny LA.
So what was this shadow? Well, America was in the grip of the Cold War, right? This massive anti-communist panic. And Congress sets its sights on Hollywood, convinced that filmmakers were sneaking secret propaganda into the movies. So this group, the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC for short, starts dragging artists in to testify. They wanted them to name names, to rat out their friends and colleagues for supposed communist ties. It was this terrifying loyalty test that just destroyed friendships and turned careers into dust, literally overnight. And this is where we meet our first real group of rebels, the Hollywood 10. When they were called in front of this committee, they basically said, no way. They refused to play the game, they stood on their constitutional rights, and for that they were blacklisted, fired from their jobs, and some of them were even thrown in jail. They were the first to stand up like this, but sadly, they weren't going to be the last.
So you've got the old system breaking apart. You've got this climate of fear. You'd think that would be the end of creativity in Hollywood, right? But you'd be so wrong. Because out of all that chaos, a new kind of hero emerged. The filmmaker as a true artist, the auteur.
And really, the blueprint for this whole rebellion was laid out years before by this boy genius, a 26-year-old named Orson Welles. His movie, Citizen Kane, it didn't just bend the rules of how you were supposed to make a movie in Hollywood, it took that rulebook and tore it into a million pieces. The way it jumped around in time, the incredible photography, the crazy camera angles, it was basically a declaration of artistic independence. It proved that one director's vision could be way more powerful than any studio boss. And then you get guys like Stanley Kubrick. He wasn't just directing a movie, he was crafting these massive philosophical statements on film. I mean, just look at 2001, A Space Odyssey. That's the perfect example. He had total control, and he took the whole sci-fi genre and used it to ask these huge questions about humanity and the universe. It was a vision that was 100% uniquely his. All this creative freedom just opened the floodgates for the next wave, right? This generation of directors who'd actually gone to film school, guys like Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese, they grabbed that torch and ran with it. And they brought this gritty, personal, messy reality to the big screen. The days of the clean-cut, perfect heroes, over. These were stories about complicated anti-heroes. And people, well, they absolutely loved it.
So what was the big idea behind all this? It's called the auteur theory, and the core of it is pretty simple, but it was revolutionary at the time. The idea is that a film isn't just a product cranked out by a studio factory. No, it should be the personal, artistic vision of one person, the director. I mean, that was a radical thought back then, and it completely changed American movies forever.
But hey, the rebellion wasn't just happening from behind the camera. Some of the biggest heroes of this time were fighting their battles from behind a typewriter, and they had to do it in complete secret. Let's dive into the amazing story of one of those original Hollywood 10 guys.
I mean, you couldn't make the story up. Dalton Trumbo. He's officially blacklisted, an outcast, can't work in town. But does he stop? No way. He refuses to be silenced. He starts writing screenplays using fake names, right? And get this, his work is so good, he wins 2 Academy Awards. While he's blacklisted, no one even knew it was him. It took the actor Kirk Douglas, who had some serious guts, to publicly put Trumbo's real name on the movie Spartacus. And that one act of defiance is what really started to break the back of the blacklist. It was a total triumph of sheer talent over tyranny.
So, where did all this lead? All this fighting, all this rebellion, all this chaos, what was the result? Well, it led to one of the most incredible, creative, and groundbreaking periods in the history of American movies, an era we now call New Hollywood. And this New Hollywood looked and felt completely different. For one thing, it brought this raw, real feeling to the screen. Thanks to new cameras that were actually portable, filmmakers could get out of the fake studio lots and shoot on real streets. The heroes, they weren't these perfect, idealized figures anymore. They were flawed, they were complex, and honestly, they were a lot more like us. Movies stopped tying everything up in a neat little bow at the end, and the main reason you went to see a film was for that director's unique vision. So what's the big takeaway here?
I think it's that sometimes you need a crisis to spark creativity. The collapse of that old system, the fight for freedom of speech, it didn't kill Hollywood. It completely remade it. And not fundamental battle, right? The battle between art and money, between the artist's vision and the studio's bottom line, well, that's a fight that is still very much alive and kicking in Hollywood today.
And that really leaves us with a huge question for right now, doesn't it? I mean, in our world of massive superhero franchises and streaming services that use algorithms to decide what gets made, where the studio formula feels more powerful than ever, who are the rebels today? Who are the ones breaking all the rules? That's definitely.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive into the history of Hollywood. We are now entering an era that wasn't about quiet artistry, but about roaring spectacle. We're talking about a time when movies just got bigger, louder, and started reaching for the stars, in every sense of the word. This is the story of 1977 to 1999, the moment when technology and epic storytelling crashed into each other and created the blockbuster.
Can you even imagine it? A time when summer was Hollywood's off-season? Seriously, it was considered a dumping ground for movies that studios had absolutely no faith in. The thinking was, well, audiences are at the beach, they're on vacation, they're basically anywhere but a dark movie theater. It was quiet, it was predictable, and let's be honest, it wasn't making anybody much money.
And then, in 1975, a mechanical shark that, by the way, barely ever worked on set, changed literally everything. It made an entire generation terrified to go swimming, but absolutely desperate to go to the movies. A new age was dawning, and folks, it smelled a lot like buttered popcorn and sounded an awful lot like a scream. That scream? Well, you could say it was the birth announcement for a totally new kind of movie. And this isn't just a story about one smash hit. No, this is about two seismic events that happened so close together, they completely redrew the map of Hollywood and, you know what, our entire culture, really. Just 2 years later, this is what happened. That opening shot, that Imperial Star Destroyer just going on and on and on, rumbling right over our heads. Wow. It wasn't just a mind-blowing special effect. It was a declaration. Hollywood was basically telling us, get ready because we're about to take you to places you haven't even dreamed of. So you put those two together and you've got the modern playbook. Jaws proved that you could take the sleepy summer season and turn it into an absolute gold rush. All you needed was a high-stakes thrill ride. But Star Wars? Oh, Star Wars took it to another galaxy. It wasn't just a movie, it was a whole mythology that you could take home with you. The action figures, the lunchboxes, the endless sequels. George Lucas proved that the universe was the business. So who were the architects behind this brave new world? Well, it really came down to three directors who didn't just use technology, they wrestled it into submission. They were our new mythmakers, swapping out ancient scrolls for storyboards and, well, magic wands for motion picture cameras. First up, of course, Steven Spielberg, the absolute master of suspense and wonder. I mean, with Jaws, he made us afraid of the beach, a place we all loved. And then with movies like E.T. or Jurassic Park, he just showed this uncanny ability to make our hearts pound with terror 1 minute and then fill them with pure awe the next. Then you've got George Lucas, the ultimate world builder. He had a vision so huge, so spectacular, that the technology to actually make it happen, it didn't exist. So what do? Well, if you're George Lucas, you just go out and invent it. He founded Industrial Light and Magic specifically to pioneer the tools that would make his galaxy, far, far away, feel completely and totally real.
And finally, the relentless innovator James Cameron. This is a man who showed us a terrifying future with that liquid metal T-1000 in Terminator 2, an effect that just made Jaws hit the floor. And then he took that same obsession with technology and aimed it at history, recreating the sinking of the Titanic with so much detail and emotion that it didn't just break box office records, it shattered them into a million pieces.
When you look at what these three were doing, a pattern emerges. It's almost a formula, a recipe for success. You start with a simple, really powerful idea, a high concept. You wrap it in visual effects that make people literally gasp out loud. And then you anchor the whole thing with big universal emotions that a kid in Tokyo and a grandparent in Texas can both connect with. The result? A global phenomenon, every single time. And the scale of success here, it's just astronomical. I mean, look at this number. When Titanic came out, pulling in $1.8 billion worldwide, it was the ultimate proof. This formula, technology plus heart, was the most powerful and, yeah, the most profitable force Hollywood had ever seen.
So we've talked about the wizards. Now let's talk about their magic wands. Behind these incredible directors was a whole arsenal of new tools, new technologies, the magic tricks that let them pull these unbelievable cinematic rabbits out of their hats.
You know, funny enough, maybe the biggest game changer wasn't on the big screen at all. It was the VCR and then the DVD. It gave movies a second life. Think about it. Before this, a movie was a temporary event. You saw it and it was gone. But now it was a tape on your shelf. You could own it. You could watch it 100 times. This didn't just create a massive new pile of money for the studios. It completely changed how we relate to our favorite films. And the actual filmmaking toolbox? It was exploding with new toys. CGI, computer-generated imagery, was the undisputed rock star. The dinosaurs in Jurassic Park weren't just cool effects. You felt like they were real, living, breathing animals. Surround sound made you feel that T-Rex's roar in your bones. The Steadicam set the camera free, letting it glide and chase and fly. And digital editing made putting it all together faster and more exciting than ever. This was it. This was the birth of the modern movie-going experience.
But it wasn't all just popcorn and spectacle. For all its bright, shining light, this new blockbuster empire cast a long, dark shadow. The relentless pressure to make bigger and bigger hits, to generate more and more profit, it came at a price that artists often paid, a price that creativity itself often paid.
To really get what was happening, you have to look back. Hollywood has a long and, frankly, pretty brutal history of controlling its stars. Just look at the tragic story of Judy Garland. Now, the methods may have changed by the 80s and 90s, but the pressure cooker was just as intense. The demand for physical perfection to match the on-screen spectacle was enormous, from the chiseled bodies of action heroes to the impossibly thin frames of leading women.
And it wasn't just the actors feeling the heat. Oh no, even visionary directors could get steamrolled. The classic case is Ridley Scott's Blade Runner. The studio got cold feet. They were terrified that its dark, thoughtful, ambiguous tone just wouldn't sell tickets. So what did they do? They panicked. They forced a clumsy voiceover on top of it and tacked on a cheesy, happy ending, compromising the director's vision for decades.
So what was fueling all this fear? Well, in a word, corporations. This was the era of consolidation. Huge media companies started gobbling up the classic studios, and when they did, the entire focus shifted. It became less about making a single great movie and more about creating IP, intellectual property. The movie was just the beginning. It had to fuel a theme park ride, sell toys, launch a TV show. Profit was king, and synergy was its queen.
And the result of all that was, well, sadly predictable. If you were making a risky, challenging film, good luck. It became so much harder to find a home for it. When Disney, after buying the famously indie-friendly Miramax, refused to distribute a controversial film like Kids, it sent a shockwave. The message was crystal clear. Corporate image and mass appeal were now way more important than artistic freedom. The space for difficult stories was shrinking, fast.
So when we step back and look at this whole explosive, chaotic, incredible era, what are we left with? It's definitely not a simple story of triumph. It's a really complex inheritance, a legacy made of both brilliant light and deep shadow, and it defines almost everything about the movies we watch today. On the one hand, you have the light. The pure, undeniable magic of seeing a dinosaur stomp across the screen for the first time, or sharing a trip to a galaxy far, far away with millions of people all at once. But we also live in the shadow. That blockbuster formula, combined with corporate ownership, led us directly to where we are now, a world of endless sequels, of cinematic universes, and a marketplace where an original medium-sized movie has a really hard time just existing.
And that really leaves us with a big question for right now, doesn't it? Those titans of the blockbuster era, they gave us these amazing, unifying cultural events. But now, in gaining the endless content we have at our fingertips, have we maybe lost?
Welcome to Raingold's talk on artificial intelligence and film. You know, between 2020 and 2025, Hollywood went through something seismic. It was a time of incredible breakthroughs, but also these deep, existential cracks. And it all revolved around one thing: the power of a story. So let's dive into this really dramatic chapter.
It really all began with silence, a kind of silence that Hollywood had never really experienced before. In 2020, the projectors stopped rolling, the theaters closed, and the great global dream machine just powered down. The storytellers were suddenly left with no audience but themselves.
And when those lights finally did flicker back on, The industry had to take a long, hard look in the mirror. That forced pause, it made everyone ask this one huge question. What did we actually see in that reflection?
Well, it saw two things, really, happening all at once. It saw these deep fractures that had been papered over for years, but it also saw the very first glimmers of a massive awakening. This was the moment a whole multiverse of new voices started to really break through the noise.
And out of that quiet came this absolute explosion of creativity. The film that really captured this new energy wasn't some giant blockbuster, no. It was this wonderfully chaotic, heartfelt, frankly bizarre story about a laundromat owner, her family, and, yeah, everything bagels.
I am, of course, talking about Everything Everywhere All at Once. What a ride that movie was. It was like a fever dream that just completely shattered all the rules and proved that a deeply personal, wonderfully weird little story could absolutely take over the entire world.
And boy did it. It just swept the 2023 Oscars, taking home 7 awards, including Best Picture. But it was so much more than that. When Michelle Yeoh gave her acceptance speech, her words here, they became this rallying cry, a real sign that things were finally, actually changing.
And this right here is the heart of that awakening. Michelle Yeoh becoming the first Asian woman to win Best Actress. Ke-Huy Kwan's incredible feel-good comeback story. It all just screamed that the stage was finally truly opening up for stories and faces we hadn't seen enough of.
That win was such a powerful statement. But, and this is a big but, at the exact same time that all this was happening, another force was pulling the industry in the complete opposite direction. A great fission was starting, with shadows creeping in from all sides.
This slide just captures that tension perfectly. It was like Hollywood was walking this impossible tightrope. On one side, you have pure creative freedom. On the other, the massive financial pull of the global market, especially the huge and hugely complex market in China.
And you can see how wobbly that tightrope was. Just look at Disney's attempts. With Mulan, the goal was to make this authentic film for Chinese audiences, but it ended up getting backlash from both sides. Then with Marvel's Shang-Chi, they tried so hard to avoid old stereotypes, but it didn't even get released in China. It was a classic lose-lose.
So this created a real crisis of expression, right? When you try to please everybody, you often end up pleasing nobody. But while Hollywood was wrestling with that puzzle, a much, much stranger threat started to emerge. And this one wasn't coming from across the ocean. It was coming from inside the machine.
I'm talking about generative AI. All of a sudden, this technology just exploded onto the scene. We're talking about AI that can write a script, paint a picture, create a digital actor from scratch. This wasn't just a new tool. For a lot of creatives, it felt like a potential replacement. And it really posed this fundamental question to everyone in the industry: what is our value? What is a human artist worth in an age of thinking machines? And the answer, as this quote makes crystal clear, was a loud, defiant no way.
So what did they do? They fought back. In 2023, the writers and actors unions launched a historic double strike. They shut the entire industry down for months, fighting for one simple idea, that human beings have to remain at the heart of Hollywood. And they won. They established some incredibly important rules for the road ahead.
And those wins were absolutely crucial. Look at this. AI can't be credited as a writer, no one can be forced to use it, and maybe most importantly, studios have to get an actor's permission and pay them fairly to use their digital double. This victory brought us to where we are now, standing at a crossroads.
So now, Hollywood is looking down two very different but equally powerful paths to the future. You've got the human multiverse on one side, embodied by films like Everything Everywhere, creative, messy, personal. And on the other, the technical universe, like James Cameron's Avatar, spectacular, immersive, and pushing the limits of technology itself.
So that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? In this new world, with infinite stories at our fingertips and artificial minds that can help create them, what kinds of myths, what kinds of stories are we going to choose to tell?
Because here's the thing. This era of awakening and fission, it isn't over. Not by a long shot. It simply rewrote the rule book on how stories get made. The future of Hollywood is going to be this fascinating, maybe messy, blend of the human and the artificial. The only question is, who's going to be holding the pen?
The next chapter is still a blank page. Will it be a human story? An artificial one? Or something new that we can't even imagine yet? That's the destiny that Hollywood, and all of us really, get to compose.
Welcome.
We're about to dive into a brand new chapter of Hollywood history, a chapter that's literally being written as we speak. It's a tale of incredible creation, yeah, but also intense conflict. And it all starts with a mysterious new star arriving in town. But this isn't just a story about some new tech. No, this is about a character, one that just kind of walked onto the set and changed, well, everything.
All right, so let's get into this character. I want you to meet artificial intelligence. Now, in our story, AI isn't your classic hero, and it's not the villain either. It's something way more interesting. It's the ultimate double agent. On one side, it's handing out these almost godlike creative powers, a total miracle worker for filmmakers. But then, on the other side, it's whispering this dark threat, this idea of replacement, and it's sparking this massive existential crisis for the entire industry.
So, just like any good movie, our story here has 3 acts. And Act 1, well, it starts out like a dream, really. Our double agent, AI, shows up looking like a friend. The perfect, tireless assistant. This was the honeymoon period, that golden age of collaboration where everyone thought, wow, this technology can only help us. It could never, ever harm us.
So how did it win everybody over so fast? Easy. It did all the grunt work, and it did it flawlessly. I mean, think about it. For writers, you've got an AI that can analyze massive amounts of data and tell you exactly where that plot twist will hit the hardest. For editors, it's like having an assistant that never ever sleeps, sifting through mountains of footage to find that one perfect shot. And for the special effects artists, it was an absolute lifesaver. Suddenly they were rendering these super complex scenes in days, when it used to take them months. It became this invisible but totally indispensable part of the crew.
Especially in the writer's room, they started calling it the ultimate intern. Seriously, it could spit out 3 different plot outlines before your coffee even got cold. And it had this perfect memory, never complained, never took a vacation, and the best part, it never, ever asked for a writing credit. It was the absolute perfect partner. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? And this optimism, it was absolutely infectious. By 2026, you had these legendary action stars, guys whose bodies were just beat up from decades of stunts, and they were celebrating the magic of AI. They were seeing this future where just one performance could give them digital immortality. They could literally fight on screen forever. It was the absolute peak of the honeymoon. But, every great story needs a twist, right? A turning point. And here it is, Act 2. Suddenly, that perfect assistant starts to cast a very, very long shadow. The other face of our double agent finally starts to emerge. And all that initial excitement, it just curdles. It turns into this deep, chilling fear. The dream of collaboration was over, and everyone woke up to the nightmare of replacement.
And here's where things get really interesting, because you see this jarring contrast. The dream that was sold to the big A-list stars was that AI would be this amazing tool to empower them, to enhance their creativity. But the reality, for thousands of other people, background actors, junior writers, all the up-and-coming artists, it was a totally different story. For them, AI wasn't a tool, it was their replacement.
And man, the conflict escalated fast. First, you had this digital cloning thing, where an actor's entire likeness could just be licensed out like a piece of software. Then came the contracts for background actors, and this was brutal. They were offered this tiny one-time fee for the permanent right to use their digital double forever. It felt like a return to the worst parts of the old studio system. But the final straw? That was a new writer's strike, and it kicked off the second that AIs started perfectly mimicking the unique styles of famous screenwriters. So you can see the crucial point here, right? This just pushed Hollywood into a complete ethical freefall. The legal system was just not ready for this at all. I mean, how do you copyright a style? Is it okay to resurrect a movie star who's been gone for decades to headline a new blockbuster? And even if you can, should you? Technology was just moving so much faster than our sense of right and wrong. The whole industry was at a breaking point. But here's the thing about Hollywood. It's a town of fighters. So Act 3 isn't about smashing the machines, going full Luddite. It's about rewriting the rules. Right in the middle of all that chaos, the creators, the people, started to push back. And the goal wasn't to destroy AI, but to put humanity firmly back in the director's chair, to figure out a whole new way of working together. So what was their strategy?
Well, for starters, you had legendary directors publicly pledging, nope, we are not putting purely AI-generated scenes in our movies. At the same time, writers and engineers actually started working together on new guidelines, what they called protocols, and they came up with this really important definition. AI is an extended brain, not a replacement hand. The key principle through it all, the human creator always has the final say.
And all of this led to a whole new working model, a new kind of partnership. The idea was that, okay, AI can generate a rough first draft of a script, but a human writer has to be the one to give it its emotional soul. Sure, a digital double can perform a life-threatening stunt, but that lead performance, that flicker of emotion in the eyes, that has to come from a real person. The AI can provide a million different options, but the director is the one who provides the singular vision. It's this really delicate balance, right? The tool and the creator working together.
And that brings us to our final act, which actually is still being written. Right now, the conflict has kind of settled into this uneasy truce, but the story is so far from over. So, what does the sequel look like? What's next? Well, let's explore 5 possible futures. 5 totally different paths that cinema could take from here.
Okay, so what are we talking about here? Path 1, could we see a major film that's directed entirely by an algorithm? That's one possibility. Or what about a world where the audience becomes the author, where you and I can use AI tools to make our own movies with famous actors and assets? Then there's this idea of a global fusion, where AI blends stories from Hollywood and Bollywood and anime into totally new global myths. Or maybe films about AI ethics, about the rights and emotions of digital actors. Maybe that becomes its own genre. And then, of course, there's the darker path, the Great Creative Depression, a future just flooded with so much cheap AI content that real, human-made art becomes this rare, expensive luxury.
But all of these possibilities, they force us to ask a really fundamental question. What are movies, really? And the answer, when you get right down to it, it isn't about technology. It's about us. It's about people. The real magic of cinema, it happens when we're all sitting together in the dark and we watch a character on screen start to cry, and we feel our own eyes start to well up. It's that shared resonance. That's the magic. And that is something no algorithm can ever fake.
So maybe, all this time, we've been asking the wrong question. It's not about, can an AI write a good script or can it direct a scene? The real question, the one that actually matters, is so much simpler and way more profound. It's, does it have a heart? Does it know what it feels like to fall completely, deeply, head over heels in love with a movie? Because that love, that heart, that's still in our hands. The story of what comes next, it isn't being written on some server farmer in a bunch of code. No, it's being written by every artist who refuses to be replaced. It's being written by every single one of us in the audience who chooses stories that feel real. So now, it's your turn. It's time to enter this new world of AI film.